What does it mean to be a digital nation, and how does it help in combating climate change?
All right. Well, first of all, this is part of a broader project we call the Future Now project.
Yep.
And the Future Now project is our plan, the government's plan for a worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario, as scientists are saying, is that in 50 to 100 years, Tuvalu's physical land territory could be fully submerged by the ocean. And so if that is the worst case scenario, how do we best prepare ourselves for that event? And that's what the Future Now project is. And there are three key initiatives under that project. Mm-hmm. One obviously looks at how we can bring values and culture to influence decisions that are being made on the international stage. And these are values really that are common across the Pacific, that looks at the community well-being and emphasizing the responsibility of individuals. In the case of the foreign policy, the responsibility of states to maintaining the well-being of all nations. So we use that values in our approach. The other initiative looks at statehood. How can we preserve our statehood if we do lose our physical territory in the future? Because the traditional way of understanding statehood under international law is that you must have a physical territory, you have a population, and a government that is in place. Our view is that statehood does not necessarily need to meet all those criteria, given state practice from history. You've heard of the concept of government in exile.
Yes.
During World War II,
Yes.
some of the European countries were occupied by the Germans, and their governments were moved overseas, but those governments were still recognized as making decisions legitimately for their territory. So it comes down to state practice. Countries like Taiwan, they meet everything. They've got a physical territory, they've got a government, they've got a population, but yet they're not a member of the UN because of recognition. Mm-hmm. And so we feel that we can try and get support on the international stage to recognize this principle of permanent statehood. Right. And so we've done this on a bilateral level because in our foreign policy we are saying that any country that wants to establish diplomatic ties with us, they have to recognize us as a permanent state, regardless of the impacts of climate change in the future. And so there are 10 countries that have already agreed and they've signed joint communiques with us, recognizing that proposition, and we'll only continue to grow that number moving into the future. But this digital nation is connected to that initiative, because if the world recognizes your statehood as permanent, how can you show the world that you can continue to function as a state? How do you continue to deliver services to your people? How do you manage resources that are coming from your EEZ, for example? Yeah. And this is what the digital nation is. It's a framework that enables a country to continue to function. So you asked me, what is a digital nation? A digital nation is one where it has migrated all its governance and administrative services online, so that they can operate remotely. Even if you take away the physical territory, they continue to exist in that space, providing services, even access to their people to learn about their culture. And this is where the metaverse work also is connected to that, but it's not the main part. The main part is connected to this issue of
and Tuvalu is the first nation to be doing that.
The first digital nation, yes.
Wow.
First digital nation, yeah. That a country can actually exist completely from that space.
So how can other Pacific nations and Aotearoa learn from the efforts of the Tuvaluans?
Yeah, no, I don't try to project this onto any other country. I think every country is sovereign and they make their own choices. Yes. But Tuvalu is doing what is necessary for Tuvalu. And if that can become a model for other countries, then so be it. We're very happy to share whatever learnings we get from this. And I think it's important as a region that we're helping one another out.
True.
So,
on the topic of anti-corruption and good governance, could you please highlight the principles that underpin the practices in Tuvalu, and this being the value that drives the distribution of community resources, the way you explain that. Yeah. And I think I have heard it for the first time,
Okay.
that somewhere it's happening. So if you could
Yeah.
share with our
Yeah,
viewers.
no. I think in many of our cultures, we already have ethical and moral principles that underpins some of the practices that we have in the Pacific. And I was explaining earlier that we've undertaken an exercise where we looked at some of these cultural practices and to try and draw out what is the value and the principle that underpins that. And quite interestingly, in Tuvalu, because Tuvalu is made up of 8 island communities, and on each island community, there is a clan that is given the responsibility of distributing resources, whether it be fish that is caught as a community and then it's shared out to everyone, or any sort of resources that the island has. So this clan has that responsibility to do that. So we talk to them and to tell them, what are some of the guiding principles that helps you in how you do your work. And across all the 8 islands, they all came up with this rule that was common right across. Number 1 rule is, when you distribute, you are the last one to take your share.
Wow.
It's part of the responsibility, is that you are the last one to take your share. And they teach this to their children. I mean, this is because it's part of the knowledge and the skill that they have, that they pass on, and they tell the kids, you need you can't be selfish, because if you're selfish, then you can't do this job. We fail as a clan and as a family. So, I mean, those are the sorts of things we need to small things like that. You need to teach that to our people, and it's not only applicable in that context. It's applicable also when you come into government.
True.
When you're a politician, when you're a head of a department, or wherever you are. Those are principles that are very important to us. And when we're talking about ethics, that's what we see in our culture. And I'm a very strong advocate for these sorts of things. And even in our foreign policy, we put values at the forefront of what we're doing. And in the conference, I mentioned about the importance of distinguishing between the practice of culture and customs and the value and the principle that underpins that practice. Practices may not be relevant when you bring it to government, because you're not distributing fish, obviously, when you're coming into government. But the value and the principle behind that governs the way they do that work is applicable in government. In government. So that's why it was important for us to define the values and the principles. Because one of the dangers back home now is that we are holding to practices, but we've lost the value. We've lost the spirit of why we did those things. And this is why I heard in the conversations here today about this culture of gift giving. And it's being misused and abused by politicians to gain something.
Where is the thin line?
Yeah, exactly. So that's why the practice is the gift giving. There's a value and there's a spirit behind that thing that needs to be right. And if it's not right, then this is why it's subject to manipulation.